Hi, hello, and welcome back to the 1983 National Football League Draft.
And with the first round pick, John Elway.
Welcome in, everybody, to Trickle Down Theories with your host, Erick Trickel.
NFL Draft. And with the first round pick,
Deion Sanders.
I was kind of scared. I thought Detroit was going to take me. I would ask for so much money that I had to put me on layaway.
Welcome back to the
NFL Draft.
Good young players. The draft's all about.
Year in and year out.
Welcome back to the
Draft.
Wide receivers, running back,
Tackle, quarterback. Every year in the draft, there has been a trade. Ricky Williams.
Welcome back to the
Draft.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Trickle Down Theories podcast. I am your host, Erick Trickel. On Trickle Down Theories, we talk about all things NFL and the NFL Draft with a small focus on the Denver Broncos, as I am also an analyst with MileHighHuddle.com. We will talk about all things from signings to trades, rosters, team needs, anything and everything you could think of when it comes to the NFL. Joining me today is Khalid Alshami, a colleague from Mile High Huddle and a Kirk Cousins fanboy, to talk about the big free agent name this year, Kirk Cousins. Before we get to that first, let's check in with the guys. Hello, Khalid. How are you doing today?
Hey, Eric. Been doing great. Have to say this is my favorite time of the year with so many possibilities during the off season.
Yeah, heard you hurt your knee. How's that going?
It's going, unfortunately. Wish I had a good leg to stand on, but absent that, everything else is very well.
Yeah, I hear that. I have some pretty bad knees, though. Not as bad as yours from what I hear you talk about. Anyways, as I said, today's show is focused on the big-name free agent out of Washington, Kirk Cousins. Just a few days ago, a big hammer dropped on the future of Kirk Cousins as Washington made a trade for Alex Smith, where they traded Kyle Fuller, a top slot corner and is still up and coming as an all-around corner, and a third-round pick for the quarterback from Kansas City. This is a huge impact on the race for Captain Kirk, but we got to look at this trade first because obviously it has such a huge impact on him. The Chiefs, they got a young corner to pair with Marcus Peters. They got that third-round pick, and it's obvious that they're ready to start Patrick Mahomes, who sat a year behind Alex Smith. And then Washington, they got Alex Smith, so that means no more Captain Kirk. And they extended him, too, for 4 years, $94 million and $71 million guaranteed. Just ridiculous.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised by the move. Smith is a older, worse version of Kirk Cousins, in my opinion. And to basically trade for him and give him the deal that they gave him when they could have paid Cousins a little bit more, who's also 4 years younger. It's just a baffling move, but at the same time, it's the Washington Redskins, so I'm not really that surprised.
Yeah, and it's unbelievable. He's 34 years old, and this isn't just a 4-year deal. It's a 4-year extension, and he has 1 year left. So that puts him in Washington until he's 40 years old. Unbelievable, especially for that amount of money.
Yeah, the money is really what surprises me there. $94 million on top of the $20 million he's scheduled to make is completely baffling for a guy who's going to be 38, 39 when that contract expires.
Yeah, it locks them into it, and they have no way out, not with that amount guaranteed. It's not the smartest of moves. And that leads us to the big name, Kirk Cousins. Obviously, as we said, Washington's moving on. You don't trade away a key building block on your defense for a 34-year-old quarterback and then give him an extension that they did. And also keep Kirk Cousins. There's just no way, no how. You can't afford it. You can't keep building a roster that way. If they did, someone would need to check Dan Snyder into the loony bin. There's still some rumors that they could tag him and then get him to sign it and trade him away from there. I've heard some stuff on this, but I want to hear what Khalid has to say before I get to it.
Well, I mean, for starters, are we sure Dan Snyder shouldn't be in the loony bin regardless? That franchise's decisions at the quarterback position make the Denver situation these past 2 seasons look like a golden standard. To answer your question, though, I've discussed the effects and plausibility of tagging Cousins at length on Twitter. Even before the trade, the likelihood of Cousins ever receiving a tag were slim to none. The transition tag would have cost Washington $28.8 million for the 2018 season and would have given Washington the right of first refusal on any contract Cousins were to sign with another team in the league. With 19 unrestricted free agents and a host of other needs, and Cousins holding all the leverage in that situation, there was very little chance that Washington would match a contract to retain him. In not doing so, the risk of using the transition tag is that Washington would be left without any compensation should Cousins have signed with another team. Past that, Using the franchise tag on Cousins would have resulted in a $34 million cap hit for the 2018 season, and something Cousins would have signed immediately to secure a huge payday and cash in long-term in 2019, where Washington would be completely unable to retain his services. 2 years on the franchise tag is a pretty ridiculous idea to begin with. A third would have just been astronomical, and that payday is something that I could never have seen Washington risking. Either way, Washington was never going to risk $34 million on Cousins by tagging him for an unprecedented third time. So this brings me to my last point regarding any tag situation with Cousins is it was never really likely, obviously because of the guaranteed money that would go to Cousins. And the likeliest course, if they wanted to receive any compensation, was to just let him enter unrestricted free agency, allow him to sign elsewhere, and which would result in Washington collecting the highest compensatory pick in the 2019 draft. Now, since Washington traded for an older, worse version of Cousins, as I mentioned a little earlier, there's no way they would franchise or transition tag Cousins. Tagging and trading him would be a very risky play if teams around the league call the Redskins bluff. A possible scenario considering the depth of the available quarterbacks through the draft, free agency, and trade market this offseason.
Yeah, everyone I talked to around the NFL, they shot down them tagging Cousins, and they have for a few weeks. It's just such a risky play. $34 million cap hit, and as soon as he signs it, it locks in. Even if they get a new deal done after he signed, after the July 15th deadline, if they sign an extension after that year is already locked in place, and that's $34 million on the cap that you can't do anything about. You have to get him signed before that, and Kirk Cousins doesn't want to be there. So they're going to be sitting with $34 million on the cap for him this year. That wasn't ever going to happen. The non-exclusive franchise tag, you can't do that with a player in their third year. And even if they did, they'd still be stuck with a ridiculous cap hit, and because no team would even make him an offer sheet and risk giving up 2 first-round picks to Washington. And then the transition tag, teams don't want to negotiate contracts for other teams. That's why you rarely see restricted free agents or transition tag players even negotiate with other teams. Teams don't want to set that contract and just have it matched. I can think of only a few instances of that happening in the last 10 years. It's just not common anymore. And as I said, they've just been everybody in the NFL I've talked to. I know I have a guy who's I'm really close to that works in Washington with the Redskins, and he shot this down over and over again. I kept asking him about it, and it got to the point where he got annoyed at me asking him. The issue is that Washington was ready to move on. They couldn't get a deal done with him because nobody knows his actual market value. You can't determine market value until they hit the open market. Tagging him for 2 years, that has really clouded his market value. So that's one risk that they had. And then I was told very specifically that they'd be in the market for a new quarterback this year, but I never was able to obtain a name. Obviously, they had their eyes set on Alex Smith, and they went and got him. Now, just letting Kirk Cousins walk, they're able to get that compensatory pick in the 2019 NFL draft, which is number 33 of the third round, or 97 overall, most likely. But it's just such a huge risk to tag him now. No team's going to want it. Basically, why tag him, the transition tag, have another team, and then why would another team offer it? They'd be screwing over Washington. Washington gets stuck with that contract. And then with the exclusive, obviously, they're not going to do that. And if they tag him and they do get him to sign, no team's going to want to trade for him. Why would they when they can just get him guaranteed for free next year? I understand that quarterback's such a valuable position, but when you can get a guy, sometimes you just don't want to give it resources up. Now, yesterday morning, the morning after the Alex Smith trade, Colin Cowherd dropped a huge bomb that got everyone, including me, to grab our phones and start working their sources. Cowherd said that the Denver Broncos were close to a deal with Kirk Cousins. It's worth noting, though, that the Broncos cannot talk to Kirk Cousins directly. That would be illegal tampering, which teams obviously they don't want to get to. It's a whole messy situation. But Denver can talk to Washington, and Washington can talk to Kirk Cousins. This would have to be a sign-and-trade type of conversation. Washington would sign him to the deal that Denver wants. Denver will give up something to go get him. And obviously, it's going to be a little bit clouded for what Washington's able to get in return, because all my sources in Denver remain confident that if Cousins is allowed to walk, they will be able to go get him. I've heard that Kirk Cousins wants to be in Denver. That is a big reason for the confidence there. Also, technically, Kirk Cousins is still under contract with Washington, so they can still re-sign him, which opens up the possibility of the sign and trade. Contracts run league year to league year, so until the new league year starts, he is still technically under contract with them. And this is exactly what Washington did with Alex Smith in the Kansas City trade. They talked to Kansas City, and they were able to get the agreement done with Alex Smith about the extension they wanted through Kansas City, and then they executed the trade, which will obviously get approved once the new league year happens. Denver's been the favorites for getting Kirk Cousins for a while. Obviously, there's other teams that have been mentioned about it, but it makes sense for them to try to guarantee it happens, right?
Absolutely. Foregoing unrestricted free agency in any competition from, say, for instance, the Cleveland Browns, who have a ridiculous amount of cap space available to them, or the New York Jets, who had a pretty good season after everyone expected them to kind of tank for a better draft pick, or even the Buffalo Bills, who made it to the playoffs this year with what many would argue quarterback play that held them back. So to get Cousins and not have to worry about competing with any of those teams has to be very appealing to Denver. And if that means giving up an asset or two to make that happen, that's something that John Elway would, I think, definitely consider. The interesting thing about going after Cousins is his long-standing desire for higher guaranteed money. So this basically would allow Denver to offer him a contract that is a little lower annually, lower than what everyone's expecting. A lot of people are expecting him to be signed for $30 million, and I know we've discussed it, but I don't really see that happening. I think his price is going to be closer to $25 million, and he's going to get a higher guaranteed salary to go along with that contract. And that really just falls in line with what Cousins has said for a while. He is very outspoken in regards to guaranteed money in the NFL, considering how brutal the sport is and how often careers are cut short. Eric Wood, for instance, just discovered a career-ending injury in his exit physical with the Buffalo Bills, and he was a fixture on their offensive line. No longer is going to be able to play in the NFL. So guaranteed money is huge, and I can see Cousins absolutely jumping at the opportunity of playing for Denver for more guaranteed money at a lower annual rate.
Yeah, I've heard some rumblings on the contract situation, and I think we'll get to that a little bit later on in more depth. I've also heard some rumblings about the potential trade details, and I can't quite get into them fully just yet. I was asked to kind of keep it quiet from my sources. Just obviously, you don't want things leaking out when things aren't set in stone. The sign and trade, it's not set in stone. Both teams can still back out, so they don't want to get all those details out there. But I can say is that there is one player that is likely to be linked with this trade, and that's Aqib Talib. Washington just traded a young corner, and they could use another corner opposite Josh Norman.
Yeah, Talib being moved this offseason is something that was probably first speculated the moment he signed that contract originally. For anyone who looked at the structure, it was very obvious during the 2018 offseason that he has only $1 million of guaranteed salary. They could save $11 million by getting rid of him, and it's the perfect time to make a decision on a cornerback. He's 32, going to be 33 this upcoming year, and paying him big money after picking up Bradley Roby's fifth-year option is unlikely, considering Roby's youth in comparison and the improvement that he showed this year, stepping in for Talib as a starter at times.
Yeah, Roby has grown every single year that he's been in Denver, and so many fans want to hate on his play, but he's really good. And a lot of fans don't realize this, is that Roby's actually covering the number one receiver more often than somebody else is. I think his rookie year, he was on the number one receiver like over 60% of the time. Just a ridiculous percentage of snaps against number one, and not something that these other guys were doing. I mean, obviously, Chris Harris is still so great at what he does. Roby was thrown to the wolves that rookie year. Now, as we mentioned, there are other teams that can jump in and get Cousins if he is allowed to just walk as an undrafted free agent. And the Jets, the Bills, Vikings, Jaguars, and the Browns, they've all been linked to him somehow. Even the Giants, though, they have an interesting situation there with Eli Manning, and I just don't really see that. But first off, we're going to talk about the Jets. They can offer a lot more money. They have a lot of extra cap space, and they're supposed to hit over 100 million in available space after they make some cuts of players who just aren't cutting it on the roster. There's a connection there with Jeremy Bates, the offensive coordinator. They have some pretty solid young talent. The Jets are looking like a team that is getting closer to being relevant again. And as I said, they have some serious money.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the Jets is Bates getting another opportunity to run an offense in the NFL. I think a lot of Denver fans were a little surprised that happened, considering his track record after leaving the Broncos. So, like we talked about before, they're a solid young team. They outdid expectations this season. But if you're going to the Jets, you're probably playing for second place at best. More likely playing for third place. I don't think that's something that Cousins is looking forward to, considering some of the comments he's made.
Yeah, that is one issue, is that they have some serious issues with a dominant number one in that division with the New England Patriots. And then the Dolphins aren't looking too bad, and the Bills aren't looking too bad. But same can be said with the AFC West, though, with the Raiders looking pretty decent with the talent they have. If they can get Derek Carr to bounce back, the Chiefs, you never know what Patrick Mahomes is going to do. And then the Chargers, they're always a threat if they can stay healthy. But the biggest thing I'm hearing is that Bates connection, and I don't see it. I don't think that is enough of a connection. He never actually coached Kirk Cousins. It's just through Mike Shanahan. So I'm not big at jumping on that connection as being the reason why he's going to sign with the Jets. And speaking of the Jets, real quick, did you see Le'Veon Bell's tweet about them?
No, what did he say?
Somebody made a comment that we'll give you $60 million in cash to come and play for the Jets. And he says that's nowhere near enough money to get me to play for the Jets.
That doesn't surprise me. That's kind of how the Jets are looked at.
Yep. The Jets aren't the place for veterans to go, especially if you're looking for trying to compete for a Super Bowl ring. So that really has to be considered when you're looking at Kirk Cousins. And then the other team is the Browns. I mean, they're the quarterback hole of the NFL. They've struggled for, almost 25 years now trying to find a quarterback. It's not a problem that's going to go away. They have issues with their owner, Jimmy Haslam. A lot of people want him to sell the team. Issues with the coaching staff. How long is Hugh Jackson going to be there? Dorsey, obviously, he prefers to build to the draft. He wants that young guy. So Cousins if they want to even shot at him, they'll have to guarantee they're not going quarterback with one of their first round picks. And they said at 1-4. So they have the perfect spot to get a young rookie quarterback. But they do have an exciting weapon in Josh Gordon, and they have a lot of money too.
Yeah, they're a very young team, and with or without Cousins, they're at least a few seasons away from contention or even serious playoff consideration. With their draft capital that they have this year, I think it's basically, like you mentioned, it's a foregone conclusion that they're going to go young at quarterback, and they can get a veteran QB who's been linked to their head coach at a much cheaper rate in A.J. McCarron from Cincinnati. So I think that kind of takes them out of the Cousins sweepstake. They're going to go in a different direction, a cheaper direction, and a younger direction.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really see the Browns in it. They wanted Alex Smith because they want to take that quarterback number one. All I've heard is that they like Sam Darnold. Obviously, months away, a lot can change. Sam Darnold could get in some serious trouble and they can go a different way. Or what I could be hearing could be a smokescreen, and they end up going Josh Rosen or Baker Mayfield. But everything is that they are going to go quarterback number one, and Kirk Cousins won't be okay with that. As I said, they wanted Alex Smith to have a rookie sit behind him, and A.J. McCarron, he could be that spot starter for him that kind of plays and may not play the best, but be decent enough to allow them to sit the rookie as they grow him. And I do know that they are not high on Kaiser. Hugh Jackson, from everything I've heard, did not want him last year. He was a Sashi pick, and that was just another issue between the front office and the head coaches that have been there and have been going on. And then the other team we mentioned is the Bills. They made the playoffs, and as you said, quarterback play can really be said that it held them back. Watching them play, I have no doubt about it that they did. Tyrod Taylor, obviously, he has some good stats on there, but he misses reads. He struggles hitting with accuracy. Just some serious issues there. But they do have a lot of talent on that roster. that is right in that prime spot to be taken over the edge with them being a quarterback away. And they still have some good money available, though.
Yeah, so speaking of the Bills, that's another team that was expected to kind of be in a tank mode after trading away a bunch of starting players or highly drafted players in recent years during the preseason. And they just happened to surprise everyone with a solid roster all around. And as you mentioned, they were completely held back by Tyrod Taylor, who has flashed over the last few years, but it's very obvious he can't read an NFL defense and is really what held them back. As their viability as a landing spot for Cousins, Buffalo is not really a place that QBs want to go to play. Their track record of missing the postseason has been very well documented, with them finally breaking that streak this past year. I wouldn't expect them to be heavily in on Cousins, and I'd expect them to try and move up to grab a QB in the draft.
Yeah, everything I've heard is that they like Lamar Jackson quite a bit, and they actually don't have that much money. They have only about $30 million in cap space. Obviously, they're going to be able to free up some with some cuts. Tyrod Taylor probably being the biggest one that's going to free up some good amount of money, almost $10 million. But it's also hitting them for almost $8.7 million. And then Eric Wood's contract situation, not sure what's going to happen there, but they're taking more dead money than cap savings there, no matter what they do. And also, they have some young talent coming up. Jordan Matthews, he's a free agent. Kyle Williams, even though he's older, he's been a stable force on that defensive line of theirs. They have some other young talent coming up, and that's just this year. Next year, I mean, Richie Incognito, he's been a big get for them. Lorenzo Alexander, Kelvin Benjamin, Jordan Mills, who they supposedly like a lot. Just a bunch of names to the next few years. And while you can't always work around the salary cap, when you have a bunch of young players taking on a big time free agent quarterback that's expensive, just isn't always easy to deal with that. Which transitions over to the Jaguars and the Vikings. First, we'll talk about the Jaguars. They're kind of struggled with strapped for cash right now. Blake Bortles, they were able to free up almost $20 million by cutting him, because if you pick up the fifth-year option, it's not guaranteed unless injury. Well, he just had surgery, so there's a physical there that would have to be taken, and if he doesn't pass it, they're on the hook for that money. So that's huge and could take them completely out of the running for it. Obviously, there's some other cuts. They can cut Chris Ivory and Alan Hearns, who's been hurt, and Ivory's just not needed with Fournette there. But that's not going to free them enough money to get Kirk Cousins. He'd have to take a lot less. And there's enticing reason to it. They have some really good young offensive talent. As I mentioned, they have Fournette there. They just got to focus on that wide receiver core, because most of those guys are on the way out or set to be free agents anyways. Tight end is still missing. But they have a top-level defense, and they came pretty close to getting to the Super Bowl too. But it's just a question of where's the money.
Yeah, I agree. The Jaguars have to be an appealing option should Cousins hit unrestricted free agency and they free up the money at the same time. But there's a lot of moving parts there to make that happen and to make that a fit. They also have a lot of top-end young talent that's going to be looking to get locked up to long-term deals here in the next couple seasons. So investing the money that they'll need to in Cousins could hurt them in the long run with all the talent that they're going to need to retain soon enough.
Yeah, just this year alone, Aaron Colvin, he played a key part. Patrick Omame, I'm not sure quite how to say his name. He's the left guard for them. He's really good. Allen Robinson, Marquise Lee, those are two of the receivers. Laurenti McCray, he contributes on that defense. Paul Posluszny, their inside linebacker. They have to find a way to replace him too. And that's this year. Next year, you add in guys like Dante Fowler, Mercedes Lewis, TJ Yeldon, AJ Kahn, Josh Wells, Jalen Strong, just a bunch of different names. Rashad Green, big-time key players. And you can't sit there and have that, because every year you're going to have people from the year prior. And then in 2020, I mean, these are guys that are probably going to be extended next year. Jalen Ramsey, Miles Jack. But still, they have their one excellent pass rusher who I can't pronounce names at all, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce his. Just so much young talent that they just can't seem to be able to actually make it work financially. The Vikings are actually in a worse spot coming up when it comes to young talent coming up for an extension. Anthony Barr, Danielle Hunter, Kendricks, Wayne Diggs, and that's just the start. And those are guys, most of them, that are going to be up for extensions next year. They have some good money this year, so maybe they find a way to front load it for this year and do that. They are a quarterback away. Case Keenum, he had a great year for them, got them really far, but in the end, he couldn't get it done. And that defense carried them far as well. But it's just a matter of that talent.
Yeah, there's a ton of talent on that team, and like you mentioned, a lot of that talent is going to sign extensions within the next year or two. I do also think that while Keenum faltered in the NFC Championship game, he might be their guy for 2018. He had a great year. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. They also have Teddy Bridgewater behind him. I think I would be surprised if one of them wasn't franchise tagged by the Vikings, and maybe they end up retaining both and figuring it out there. Sam Bradford's also a free agent for that team, and they have Broncos fan favorite Kyle Sloter back in the three of them up. So it'll be an interesting situation to monitor for sure.
Yeah, out of all the quarterback situations, they're the one to keep an eye on. They have those three free agent quarterbacks. Teddy Bridgewater looked promising before he got that nasty injury. Case Keenum had a good year, but the track record there isn't always the best. So, and gotta say this, everything I've heard from out of Minnesota, I have a good friend who lives there, and he follows the team religiously, and I'm talking to him constantly. And while he doesn't work for them, he says that everything is that they want to keep at least two of those quarterbacks, and then it's likely to be Keenum and Bridgewater. And my contact within the team, what he says, while it hasn't been verbatim the same thing, you can read that the implication is there that they want to keep those two guys. So I can't really see them being in on Kirk Cousins, but nothing would surprise me there. Now, those teams, they either arguably have a better overall roster than Denver does, or they might have a better coaching situation, or they have more money to spare. So what makes Denver more enticing than them?
Cousins to Denver makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. Back in 2012, when Peyton Manning signed with Denver, that roster had nowhere near the amount of talent that this Denver Bronco team has. Back then, Demaryius Thomas, Eric Decker, those guys were unknowns. They were honestly kind of considered failed draft picks by the previous regime and Josh McDaniels. So you were banking on a lot of potential on that team, whereas there's a lot of established talent on this Denver team. So there's a lot to be said for that in joining Denver. The last 2 years, they really have been a quarterback away. In 2015, even with some of the worst quarterback play in the NFL, that defense carried them to a Super Bowl win. And everything Cousins has said is that while money is important, winning is at the top of his list right now. And there's no better place for him to do that than in Denver.
Yeah, they still have a lot of those key pieces on that defense. They're just need to add a few more, and being able to cover tight ends and running backs from the linebacker position is probably the biggest one, and that's something that can be addressed in the draft for cheap, and then fixing the offensive line, and boom, there you go. Obviously, Denver is going to be moving on from a lot of talent. We've mentioned Talib and then a bunch of other players that are there. And yeah, this roster they have now is a lot better than it was in 2012. Von Miller, yeah, he had his rookie year and he played pretty well. They had Elvis Dumerville, but outside of that, the offensive line was just it was questionable. The defensive line in general was questionable. The secondary was questionable. Just the linebacker core was questionable. Their run game was questionable because no Sean Marino, you never knew about his health. Just everything around it was questionable. I mean, they had a lot of talent there, but they're young talent, and a lot of those guys ended up not panning out. As you mentioned, Thomas and Decker, people thought they were busts. Julius Thomas, where was he? Virgil Green. Peyton Manning came to Denver, and he elevated the talent that was there. Now, you still have this year, there's talk of both Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders being gone, but that's not going to be the case. Only one of them will be. And either way, both of them, they had their best years under Peyton Manning. And even when Sanders was with Pittsburgh, it wasn't the best years of his career. They weren't, while he contributed, he wasn't a huge piece. They have a solid running game now. And even if they move on from CJ Anderson, which they will be doing, they still have an offensive line in front of them that is still one of the better run blocking offensive lines. The offensive line isn't as bad in pass protection as people make it out to be. A quarterback holding the ball for around 3 seconds on average really hurts them. They were able to maintain their blocks and keep pressure from happening for right around the league average, which is what you need. You just got to give the quarterback enough time to go through his reads, and they just weren't able to do that this last year. And then, yeah, that talent leaving is questionable, but they have a lot of young talent that can step up, and they're in a good position to make some moves in the draft. And if they trade away some of these guys that they're moving on from anyways for draft picks, that just brings in more youth around it, and it enables the Broncos to build their offense around Kirk Cousins, because they're going to take a step back, try to get him, and then build it around him. They're going to try to keep that run game going, though. John Elway, he has a history of winning. Obviously, there's a concern with Vance Joseph there. I think that fans are getting a little carried away with their hate on him, especially after the Senior Bowl, which I'll never actually use to seriously judge a coach's ability. They're there to evaluate the talent more so than actually win the game, even though the players do want to win. And Denver faced the receivers in that Senior Bowl faced a lot of drops, but that's a whole different conversation. It's just, he was able to keep his job because the question was he more of a detriment to the team than the lack of quarterback play? Obviously, the belief is quarterback play, so maybe he actually is able to turn around this year, but there is a question mark there. They have a good mixture of veterans and youth. Von Miller, he's still in his prime. As I said, their offense has been, and you said their offense has been struggling, and they're able to build it around Kirk Cousins. And if you really look at this roster, while they do have holes around it, they are a quarterback away from being competitive again. The fact that they were able to go 5-11 with the quarterback play shows just how talented this roster actually is. Now, we focus on the team side of things quite a bit, but what about Cousins? Khalid, I know you're a big fan of his, and I've been rather hesitant of it rather than going in the draft and getting a guy. But what does Cousins bring to the team that these other guys don't?
It's actually pretty funny. I've followed Cousins closely the past 3 seasons, all of which he's been the starter for the Washington Redskins. And the reason being is a little odd, but in all of my fantasy football leagues, I've been able to draft him later than a lot of the other top quarterbacks that go in those drafts. So whenever I could pick him, I did. And for that reason, I've followed Washington closely. And he has been, more or less, he's basically been Washington's offense the past 3 years. In those years, all as the starter, as mentioned before, the run game that they had ranked 20th, 21st, and 28th, while the passing attack was 11th, 2nd, and 12th. On the other side of the ball, the defense ranked 28th, 28th, and 21st in yards allowed, while they were 17th, 19th, and tied for 27th in scoring defense. So Cousins never really got much help from the rest of his roster while he has been the starter in Washington. A lot of people kind of like to say, what has Cousins done to elevate his teammates? I mean, it's pretty clear that he has elevated his teammates. Deshaun Jackson, who was the team's leading receiver in 2016, left for a big free agent contract with Tampa Bay, and his performance dropped precipitously. So Cousins elevates the team around him for sure, and has done so with very little help. As a starter in those 3 years, he's thrown for 4,000 yards each season. He's completed 64% of his passes at least in each season, and he's never scored fewer than 29 touchdowns. That's accounting for passing and rushing touchdowns. He actually led the Redskins in rushing touchdowns in 2 of those 3 seasons. So again, just kind of reinforcing that this guy was the Washington offense and did not receive much help. Protecting the ball is going to be a big key for whoever comes to Denver, especially after the, let's call it, turnover issues with Trevor Siemian the past 2 seasons. Cousins has never thrown more than 13 interceptions in a season as a full-time starter. So he's going to protect the ball. He's going to score for you. He's going to elevate everyone on that offense. And with a defense like Denver's behind him, it's going to take a lot of pressure off of him. A lot of people would consider 2017 to be a down year for him in comparison to 2015 and 2016, which were better years statistically. But he still performed very well while keeping Washington competitive after losing his top 3 running backs to injured reserve, his Pro Bowl tight end and All-Pro left tackle who missed basically half of the season and both ended up on injured reserve, and a team that also saw its 2 leading receivers walk in free agency and sign elsewhere. And this isn't even accounting for the fact that Washington used more offensive line combinations than any other team in the NFL last season. Aside from being a known commodity, Cousins is a player that can fit in a number of different schemes and would be a dream for Bill Musgrave to work with. He has a plus arm, excellent accuracy. He can contribute with his legs, as evidenced by that career high in rushing yards this past season. And he has scored at least 4 rushing touchdowns in each of the past 3 seasons.
Has he really actually led them in rushing touchdowns?
Yeah, in 2 of the past 3 seasons. It's a crazy stat.
I did not know that.
To say the least.
Hey, that's actually nice to hear. Obviously, I know you and I, we've gone back and forth on this about Twitter, about Kirk Cousins and where he ranks in the quarterback community. And I still personally do not think he is a top 10 quarterback, but I definitely understand the argument there. Help hasn't always been there for him. And while there is plenty of talent around him, they don't step up. I know at receiver, they've had some decent talent there, but they never seem to step up. Tight end can't stay healthy. The running back couldn't stay healthy. Their offensive line was constantly getting banged up this year, and Cousins was still contributing pretty consistently. So obviously, I definitely understand the argument there. And looking back on it and how this year ended up and all the injuries they suffered, I may actually be comfortable putting him somewhere in the top 10. So I definitely have changed my mind on it. And my biggest thing for him, though, was the rumored contract of $30 million on an average per year. That is a lot of money. But there was a report put out by Optimum Scouting's Eric Galko of a potential deal from Denver that could be around $20 million APY, which is a lot lower than all the rumors of $30 million. It's $10 million, huge difference. And I don't know about you listeners that were opposed to Kirk Cousins, but being able to get him for a lot cheaper than the $30 million definitely softens my stance up a lot. And definitely understanding the fact that quarterback contracts in the next few years are going to skyrocket, and Alex Smith's contract is going to be a lead contributor to that. And after I saw the report from Galco, I sent out some emails, sent out some texts, just trying to reach all my contacts around the NFL that might have some information on this. And they all said that he's not too far off. They said that it's going to be 20 to 25 million on an average per year basis. And worth noting, average per year does not mean that is each year's salary cap. It just means is the average of the total money breakdown over those years, which gives some freeway with how they structure the contract, obviously. But the thing is that they're going to offer huge number in guaranteed money. Almost, I've heard anywhere from 70 to 80% of his contract being fully guaranteed. Not even injury guaranteed, fully guaranteed. And as you said, Kirk has definitely been one that's very vocal about getting guaranteed contracts in the NFL. And I can't remember who it was, but a former agent, I think might have been Andrew Brandt, I don't know. I know somebody who's former agent or former general manager said that if players actually want fully guaranteed contracts, they're going to have to take a lot less than their market value. And this could be kind of what Kirk Cousins' thinking is that he's, with how vocal he's been about guaranteed contracts, take a little bit less and get more money guaranteed.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me at all, and we touched on it a little earlier in this segment. Cousins is the bottom line is that guaranteed salary. That's why he's been open about if he were to be franchise tagged, he'd sign that tender immediately because that salary is guaranteed regardless of what happens throughout the season. So for him to suggest taking less money per year to up his guarantees is something that could also start a trend for players in the NFL because, as we talked about, it is a brutal sport. Guys drop like flies throughout the season. I think this season there were more season-ending injuries than any year before. With Thursday night football coming into play and those quick turnarounds, guys are getting injured at an alarming rate. So that doesn't surprise me at all that Cousins would do so. And to get him between 20 and 25 a year, likely a record guarantee, would be a pretty decent trade-off and allow Denver a lot of flexibility in signing him to be able to work elsewhere on the roster as well. We both know Mike Sullivan, who is their in-house cap guru, is a guy who does cap gymnastics with the best of them and has done it consistently and allowed the team to have flexibility to work wherever they see fit to improve the roster.
Yeah, another thing to consider too with all the injuries coming is there's a lot more travel going on. More games in London, games in Mexico, a lot more travel. And while you aren't playing a game so close to each other and you have that break, it's still a little bit hard on the body to travel. I know I've flown down to Colorado and back up to Alaska a lot, and I know how my body reacts to it. And while I'm no athlete, it's hard. You get jet lagged, and it's definitely not the easiest thing to deal with. In watching, what one was it? Not Hard Knocks, but the other one, All or Nothing. They had to fly over with the Rams. They had to fly over to London, and one of their key players was having such a hard time because he wasn't sleeping right. The jet lag just got to him. So that's definitely playing a factor on it too, because their bodies aren't getting the right rest even when they aren't on the field. Now, we're getting close to running out of time here. We've been going for quite a while now. And before we go and get out of here, and there's a couple more things, but before we get to that, any last Cousins on Kirk Cousins in Denver?
I think there's plenty to be argued for signing Cousins in free agency, and it mostly has been. In adding him, you answer the biggest offseason question while keeping your veteran locker room happy. Von Miller, Brandon Marshall, and even C.J. Anderson, even though he's expected to be playing elsewhere in 2018, have all publicly pitched basically signing Kirk Cousins. And it doesn't surprise me considering their experiences with Trevor Siemian the past 2 years and the failed Paxton Lynch experiment. So going that route again will probably be something that's detrimental to that locker room. I can't see them getting behind a young signal caller after the experiences of the past 2 seasons.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be hard. Paxton Lynch, he came in with an air of arrogance about him, thought he was hot stuff after the high pick, and he loved the video games more than the playbook. So having to deal with that obviously isn't going to make veterans very happy. Few of them have even spoken out about how rookies or young guys are coming in and thinking they're hot stuff. And Kirk Cousins, he has that veteranness to him, for lack of a better term. He knows how to handle himself on and off the field. He knows how to handle teammates. He knows how to handle big personalities after dealing with Jackson and sitting behind Robert Griffin as well. So that's some added bonus on there. It opens up the draft a lot more as well. That's the big thing for me. You don't get Kirk Cousins, you're kind of stuck having to try to go get one of those big 3 quarterbacks, either Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, or Baker Mayfield at number 5, or trading up with the Colts to number 3. You're just stuck in that, and that's not something you want to be. You never want to go into the draft with it. Even if they go sign a different veteran quarterback, you're still stuck taking one of those guys, and not something you want to be. You want your options open. You want all options on the table, because you never know. Some team may decide, oh, hey, we have this guy. We want to go get him. Here's 20 billion future first round picks. Obviously, that's a bit of a hyperbole there, but sentiment is a huge offer coming out. Team has to be willing to move down. And if you're locked in on a quarterback, you can't do that. So as a draftnik myself, I just love the idea of Kirk Cousins coming to Denver and being able to move around in the draft. And last thing, before we wrap this up, I got to ask, Denver starting quarterback next year, is it Kirk Cousins or someone else? And if it's someone else, who do you think?
Well, you know where I've been on this. I've basically had this stance since probably mid-season, to be honest. It's going to be Kirk Cousins in my eyes. I don't think there's really another option. I don't think there's another route, like you said, that opens up their draft pick and opens up their draft board to not being pigeonholed into taking a quarterback. It basically gives Denver a lot of options, and that's something that has to be attractive to John Elway. If it's not Cousins, though, I mean, I know you'll love it. Yeah, I'm going to go with your boy Baker Mayfield. He'd be my only other option to start for Denver in 2018.
Yeah, personally, I do think they go Kirk Cousins. Everything I've heard has been that way. They're confident. I know I've heard Kirk Cousins wants to be in Denver. And when John Elway really wants a guy, he really misses. The obvious example of him missing is Calais Campbell last year. But he just left for what he felt was a better opportunity and what his wife felt was a little bit sunnier pastures, so to speak. Being in Florida and all. So if they do miss out on him, obviously they're stuck going in draft getting a quarterback. I could see them trying to get Tyrod Taylor. I know Gary Kubiak, who has a huge voice in the front office this year, likes him. I could see them getting him and then drafting Baker Mayfield. Their play styles are rather similar. Baker Mayfield's the better talent, obviously. Better at reading defense, better arm, better accuracy. But if anything were to happen to Mayfield, you don't have to switch up, cause huge drastic changes to the offensive playbook for Tyrod Taylor. And if they do get Kirk Cousins, I do still think they get a quarterback in the draft. I'm looking at a guy like Mike White out of Western Kentucky or Brandon Silvers out of Troy. I would love to get Kyle Aletta. He's my millionaire version of Trevor Siemian. But at that point, you're looking at a guy to be a backup and develop. 3 quarterbacks that they have on the roster right now aren't going to be there. Brock Osweiler, he's probably taking his talents to Arizona. Trevor Siemian looking at you, Atlanta, to come trade for him. And Paxton Lynch, just a lot of people upset. A lot of veterans want him gone. People in the front office want him gone. Even some of the coaching staff want him gone. So it's hard to see him sticking around. But as I said, I'm leaning Kirk Cousins. A lot can change between now and then, but everything I'm hearing is him. Something you want to add?
Yeah, I will say if it ends up not being Cousins and they have to draft Baker Mayfield, I would actually throw out as a dark horse candidate a guy like Chase Daniel, who's going to cost a lot less than Tyrod Taylor, who has spent the majority of his career learning behind Drew Brees and also comes from a similar college system as to what Baker Mayfield did in Oklahoma. So to kind of help bridge the gap from college to the pros for Mayfield, I think Daniel would be an ideal guy who can also mentor Mayfield and wouldn't alter the offense at the same time.
Yeah, Chase Daniel, he's definitely a dark horse, under the radar guy. Just nobody knows him really. Obviously, teams have spent some big money to get him. Who was it? The Philadelphia a couple years back, they signed him to a huge contract, didn't they?
Yeah, so actually, when he was a free agent with the New Orleans Saints, he signed a pretty lucrative backup deal with the Kansas City Chiefs when Andy Reid took over there. Once Doug Peterson left Kansas City to become the head coach of Philadelphia, he also signed Chase Daniel, who was an unrestricted free agent at the time, to basically be his starting quarterback. This was before the team decided to draft and trade up for Carson Wentz, which has turned out to be an excellent decision. So since then, Daniel went back to New Orleans and backed up Drew Brees this season.
Yeah, and he has a play style, if I remember right, similar to what Baker Mayfield brings. So he's another one to keep an eye out if they miss out on Kirk Cousins. Anyways, that's going to wrap up the show. Thank you all for listening to Trickle Down Theories. Please leave a like and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Khalid Alshami and my own at Erick Trickel. You can always reach us on there with any kind of questions, and we're more than willing to respond. We love the interaction with you guys, just all of it, all the time. We just love it. Because without your support, we wouldn't be here. So we thank you for that. And least we can do is respond back to you guys and interact. Also, please follow at Mile High Huddle for all of our written work from milehighhuddle.com and the Huddle Up podcast for all the podcasts. Our colleagues, Chad Jensen, Will Keys, Carl Dumler, and Nick Kendall, they do an excellent job over there. And you often hear me on the draft podcast with Nick Kendall and Carl as well. It's all focused specifically on the Denver Broncos. So if you're a big fan, definitely follow those guys, all of them. And make sure you keep an ear out or eye out. Follow my YouTube channel. It's just Erick Trickel. I do Trickle Down Theories. It's going to be expanding more than just the podcast. I'll be doing live breakdowns of players over there every now and then. I really hope I'm going to be able to get around to it within the coming weeks. And so I'll be putting up breakdown videos over there. Just please follow us all. Keep an eye out. Support us. Without your support, we wouldn't be here. And we as I said, we're so thankful for that. Anyways, I had a great time with you, Khalid, and I hope to have you on again in the future. For Khalid, I'm your host, Erick Trickel. Thank you for listening to Trickle Down Theories, and have a wonderful evening.
Hey gang, Chad Jensen here. Big reminder, make sure you subscribe specifically to Trickle Down Theories on iTunes, separate from Huddle Up. It's all under the same umbrella, but it's going to have a different feed in iTunes, so make sure you're subscribing specifically to Erick and Trickle Down Theories.
Mile High Huddle.